You've awakened. Your consciousness has shifted. You've seen through illusions, faced your shadows, expanded beyond your old limitations. But there's a problem nobody warned you about. Your old self keeps showing up. Old patterns resurface. Old reactions trigger. Old versions of you that you thought were dead keep appearing. And you're starting to panic. Did I actually awaken? Or was it all temporary? Why can't I just be the new me consistently? Carl Jung discovered something that will completely change how you understand post-awakening struggle. Your old self doesn't die in awakening. It becomes dormant but remains encoded in your psyche. And under stress, threat, or triggering circumstances, it resurfaces automatically. Not because you've failed, but because awakening is a consciousness shift, not a personality transplant. And this creates a specific struggle that all awakened people face, but few talk about. Today, I'm revealing why Jung said, awakened people inevitably struggle with their old self, what's actually happening when old patterns resurface, and why this struggle is proof your awakening is real, not evidence that it failed. The first reason will explain why you can't just become a new person permanently. Here's what Jung understood that changes everything. Awakening doesn't erase who you were. It adds new consciousness to existing psychological structures. Your old self, with all its patterns, wounds, and conditioning, doesn't disappear. It gets integrated, not eliminated. And this means you're not trying to become someone new. You're learning to consciously inhabit old patterns rather than being unconsciously controlled by them. Jung called this the persistence of psychological structures. Your personality, formed over decades, doesn't dissolve in awakening. Your wounds don't vanish. Your conditioning doesn't erase. What changes is your relationship to these structures. Before awakening, they ran you unconsciously. After awakening, you see them consciously. But seeing them doesn't make them disappear. It just makes you aware of what was always operating. Most people think awakening means becoming a completely different person. But Jung observed that awakened individuals are fundamentally the same personality, just conscious instead of unconscious. The patterns remain. The difference is awareness of them. And this creates a specific struggle. You're simultaneously the old self and the new awareness watching the old self. The first reason explains why this split creates constant tension. Your old self isn't just psychological, it's neurological. Decades of patterns have created neural pathways that fire automatically under certain conditions. And awakening doesn't rewire your brain instantly. Your nervous system still defaults to old responses because those pathways are literal physical structures that don't dissolve just because consciousness expanded. Think about your conditioned responses. Someone criticizes you and you defend automatically. Someone triggers you and you react immediately. Someone abandons you and you panic reflexively. These aren't conscious choices. They're neural pathways firing, and Jung discovered that awakening creates awareness of these patterns, but doesn't eliminate the pathways themselves. One of Jung's patients described this. After my awakening, I thought I'd be different. Then my father criticized me, and I defended myself exactly as I always had. Same reaction, same energy, same old pattern. I was devastated. I thought I'd failed at awakening. Jung explained, your nervous system is still wired for old responses. Awakening gave you awareness of the pattern, but awareness doesn't instantly rewire decades of conditioning. You're now conscious of what was unconscious. That's the victory, not eliminating the pattern. This is what Jung meant by the persistence of conditioning. Your old self lives in your nervous system as established pathways. Under stress or triggering, Your system defaults to these pathways because they're the most established routes. Awakening doesn't erase the routes, it creates awareness that you're traveling them. And that awareness eventually allows new routes to form, but it takes time. You'll recognize this if old patterns still trigger automatically despite your awakening. If you react before you can stop yourself, then witness the reaction with new awareness. This isn't failure, it's the gap between consciousness shift and nervous system adaptation. Your awareness has awakened, your nervous system is still catching up. But neurological persistence is just one layer. The second reason reveals something about psychological safety. Your old self isn't random personality. It's a carefully constructed survival strategy that kept you safe in circumstances that required it. And you can't just abandon survival strategies when your nervous system still perceives threats, even if those threats are no longer real. Think about who you became to survive. Maybe you became the peacemaker to avoid family conflict, the achiever to earn love, the invisible one to stay safe, the comedian to deflect pain. These weren't personality choices. They were survival adaptations. And Jung observed that awakening reveals these strategies but doesn't eliminate the perceived need for them. One of Jung's analysts described this. I realized my people-pleasing was a survival strategy from childhood. I had to please my volatile mother to stay safe. After awakening, I saw this clearly. But I couldn't just stop. When people were unhappy with me, my system went into panic. My nervous system still believed my survival depended on pleasing them. Jung said I couldn't abandon the strategy until my nervous system felt safe enough to. My old self was protecting me from threats it still believed were real. This is what Jung meant by the protective function of ego structures. Your old self isn't just habits, it's protection. And you can't consciously eliminate protection your unconscious still believes you need. You're stuck between awakened awareness that knows you're safe and old conditioning that's convinced you're not. This creates profound internal conflict. You'll recognize this if you see your patterns clearly but can't stop them. If you know intellectually you're safe, but your body responds as if you're not. If awareness alone isn't enough to change behavior. This isn't weakness, it's your system protecting you from threats it was conditioned to fear, even if those threats no longer exist. But survival strategies are just one reason old patterns persist. The third reveals something about identity. Here's what Jung observed. Your old self is reinforced by everyone who knew you before awakening. Family, old friends, colleagues, they relate to who you were. And their expectations, projections, and interactions unconsciously pull your old self back into operation. You can't maintain new consciousness around people who only know old you. Think about being around family. You've awakened, transformed, shifted consciousness. But the moment you're back in family dynamics, old patterns activate. You become who you were with them, the dynamic they know. Not from choice, but from the social field pulling old you into familiar role. And Jung discovered this makes maintaining awakened consciousness incredibly difficult. One of Jung's patients described this. I'd done years of work, awakened, transformed. Then I visited my family for a week. Within hours I was back in old patterns. The dutiful daughter, the peacemaker, the one who doesn't have needs. Not because I chose it, but because everyone related to me as that person. Their projections, their expectations, they pulled old me forward. Jung said this is why awakened people often have to distance from old relationships. Maintaining new consciousness around people who only know old you is nearly impossible. This is what Jung meant by the social reinforcement of ego structures. You're not just maintaining old self internally. External relationships are actively reinforcing it. Every interaction that treats you as who you were strengthens old patterns. To maintain awakened consciousness, you often need new relationships that don't have investment in old you. You'll recognize this if you regress around certain people, if family visits undo months of progress, if old friends bring out old you automatically. This isn't your failure. It's the social field pulling you into the role that's familiar to them. Maintaining new consciousness often requires distance from people who only know old you. But social reinforcement is just one challenge. The fourth reason reveals why the struggle intensifies. If you're struggling with your old self resurfacing, despite awakening, Jung would say, this isn't evidence of failure. It's the natural struggle between awakened consciousness and conditioned patterns. The struggle itself proves your awakening is real. Before we continue, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get True Self-Discovery. Now, these final reasons reveal why this struggle is actually necessary. Jung's fourth insight. Your old self keeps resurfacing because it contains shadow material you haven't fully integrated yet. Each time old patterns activate, they're showing you remaining unconscious material that needs attention. The struggle isn't a problem. It's the ongoing integration process revealing what still needs work. Think about what triggers old patterns, specific people, situations, emotions. Jung discovered that these triggers are messengers, showing you where shadow material remains. Your old self resurfaces precisely in areas where integration isn't complete, not to torment you, but to show you what still needs consciousness. One of Jung's analysands described this. Every time my old defensive self appeared, Jung would ask, what's being protected? What shadow is this pattern covering? I'd discover every resurfacing of old me was pointing to unintegrated material. My defensiveness covered shame I hadn't processed. My people-pleasing hid rage I hadn't acknowledged. Jung said, old patterns are teachers showing you remaining work. The struggle with old self is the integration process continuing. This is what Jung meant by the pedagogical function of regression. When old patterns resurface, they're not evidence you've failed. They're showing you what needs attention. Each return of old self is an opportunity to integrate material that's still unconscious. The struggle is the work, not evidence the work isn't working. You'll recognize this if patterns resurface around specific triggers. If you can track what activates old self and find shadow material there. If each resurfacing reveals something about yourself you hadn't fully seen. This isn't regression, it's integration revealing itself layer by layer. But shadow integration is just one function. The fifth reason reveals something about humility. Your old self resurfacing is what prevents spiritual inflation. The ego disease where you identify as enlightened and superior. Every time old patterns activate, you're reminded you're still human, still flawed, still working. And this keeps you grounded in reality rather than lost in spiritual fantasy. Think about what happens when you think you've transcended your old self completely. Subtle superiority creeps in. I'm past that. I'm more conscious now. I've awakened beyond those patterns. But Jung discovered this identification with being awakened is just ego in new form. And old patterns resurfacing shatter this inflation by proving you're still very much human. One of Jung's patients described this humbling. I was getting spiritually arrogant, identifying as awakened, seeing myself as more conscious than others. Then I had a complete old pattern meltdown over something trivial, defensive, reactive, completely unconscious. It was humiliating, but Jung said this was exactly what I needed. My old self appearing kept me from spiritual inflation. It reminded me I'm human, not enlightened, still working, not completed. This is what Jung meant by the necessity of remaining grounded. Your old self resurfacing is protection against the most dangerous post-awakening trap, thinking you're done, enlightened, beyond human struggles. Each return of old patterns proves you're still in process. And that awareness prevents the spiritual ego that's more dangerous than regular ego. You'll recognize this if old patterns activate right when you're feeling most awakened. If moments of unconsciousness follow periods of feeling spiritually advanced. This isn't cosmic punishment. It's your psyche keeping you honest about where you actually are versus where you think you are. But humility is just one benefit. The sixth reason reveals the deepest purpose. Jung's final insight. The struggle with your old self isn't something to overcome. It is the integration process. The tension between awakened awareness and conditioned patterns is how new consciousness gets woven into existing psychological structures. You're not trying to eliminate the struggle. The struggle is doing the necessary work of transformation. Think about what integration actually means. It's not replacing old with new. It's weaving new consciousness through old structures until they're inseparable. And Jung discovered this weaving happens through the constant friction between awareness and pattern. Each time old self surfaces and awareness witnesses it, integration deepens. One of Jung's most developed patients described this. I used to think I was failing because old patterns kept appearing. Jung reframed it completely. The struggle between your awakened awareness and conditioned patterns is the integration process itself. Every time old self surfaces and you witness it consciously, you're integrating. The goal isn't eliminating old self. It's becoming conscious of it so completely that it no longer controls you unconsciously. The struggle is the work. This is what Jung meant by integration through conscious struggle. You're not trying to make old self disappear. You're learning to inhabit it consciously rather than unconsciously. Each time it surfaces and you see it, you're integrating old structures with new awareness. Eventually, old patterns remain, but operate consciously rather than unconsciously. The struggle never completely ends. It just becomes more conscious. You'll recognize this if the struggle itself feels like the practice. If witnessing old patterns activate is the work, not stopping them. If you understand that becoming conscious of what was unconscious is the transformation, not eliminating what was there. Why awakened people struggle with their old self? Your old self is hardwired into your nervous system. Patterns are literal neural pathways. Your old self is a survival strategy. Protection your system believes it still needs. Your old self is how others know you. Social fields reinforce old patterns. Your old self contains unintegrated shadow. Resurfacing shows remaining work. Your old self keeps you humble, prevents spiritual inflation. The struggle itself is the integration. Friction between awareness and pattern is how transformation happens. Jung would want you to understand. Struggling with your old self isn't evidence you didn't truly awaken. It's proof you did. Because only awakened awareness can witness old patterns consciously. Before awakening, you were the patterns unconsciously. After awakening, you see them consciously. And that seeing, even when you can't stop them, is the transformation. Most awakened people judge themselves for old patterns resurfacing. But Jung insisted this is the normal process. Integration takes years, sometimes decades. You're not trying to become someone new. You're learning to consciously inhabit who you've always been. The patterns remain. What changes is your relationship to them. If you're struggling with your old self despite awakening, if old patterns keep resurfacing, if you can't seem to consistently be the new you, Jung would tell you, stop fighting it. The struggle is the integration process. You're not failing. You're in the natural friction between awakened consciousness and conditioned structures. Your old self will keep appearing. That's not regression. That's remaining material showing itself so it can be integrated. Each time old patterns surface and you witness them consciously, integration deepens. You're not trying to eliminate old self. You're learning to inhabit it consciously rather than unconsciously. Be patient with yourself. Integration isn't quick. The nervous system adapts slowly. Survival strategies release gradually. Social reinforcement takes time to navigate. Shadow integration is layered. Humility requires ongoing reminding. The struggle continues, but it becomes more conscious, less controlling, more integrated. You're doing the work. The struggle itself is proof of that. Keep witnessing. Keep being patient with old patterns resurfacing. Keep recognizing that seeing them consciously is the victory, not stopping them completely. That's how integration actually happens. Not through elimination, but through consciousness gradually weaving through what was always there. Subscribe to explore Jung's insights on navigating the integration struggle. To dive even deeper into Jung's revolutionary psychology and what it means for your spiritual awakening, click the recommended video on your screen now.